you go, and you run against your plan, right? And those of you who have done research and development, R&D, know the world doesn't always work that way. When you don't know the answer, you have to innovate. It was mentioned, you have to do experimentation. You have to learn. And that applies not only to technology, but to business models. We really have to think about what can we create, what doesn't exist already. And that's difficult for people that are used to flawless execution. When you're sort of innovating, you're saying, I want to create the future. And that's a very different perspective. But I think if you think about enterprise development in base of the pyramid, we need to be over here. And I see too many ventures trying to do flawless execution. They write their plans, they figure things out in Washington, D.C., New York, Tokyo, and then they go to the base of the pyramid, wherever that is, and they run the plan they've developed literally thousands of miles away. And the chances of that being successful, I think, are quite small. The good news, there's actually a set of tools, and I'm going to go over these at a high level. There's a set of tools that we can think about, we can execute against to help us be more successful. So I'll say it. This isn't, in some sense, this is blindingly obvious, but on the other hand, we sometimes forget it. Enterprise leaders will succeed if they have a set of guiding principles. So what are the strategies, the ideas, the capabilities they need to have to be successful, right? And we've done that for business forever. You know, for those of you who've been in business, you know, Michael Porter's 5 Forces. There are strategies that can apply to businesses so that we can create a set of guiding principles based on creating value with the BOP. My gosh, that's business 101. I got to understand the value proposition that my customer wants, right? We forget that somehow in base of the pyramid, but we have to really understand how we create value for those we seek to serve, and that are integrated with development investments. This is with the development community, but most businesses, this is just like we got to form the right partnerships, right? So we got to know what to do, we got to know our value proposition, and we got to know who to work with. In some sense, very obvious, but on the other hand, not many people seem to be doing this right yet at the base of the pyramid because they forget one or more of these when they're executing. And we now actually have frameworks. So I don't have time to go over them all. Part of this presentation is to give you the confidence that there are things in place that can help you be successful. And there's more background on all of this. But I want to dive into each of them a little bit. So we'll talk a little bit about sort of first, how do you go to scale? Sort of what are the guiding principles? And it's really around this framework that I call co-create, innovate, integrate. Right? And I'll talk a little bit about each one. But the co-create is really about envisioning what can be. And it has a, whoops. Oh, that's right. This is where it's all out of order. All right. It's okay. So part of it is co-creating is thinking about the world differently. Right? We want to co-create with the base of the pyramid. So one of the things that I want you to do is to think about the map of the world. Okay? You know, what's right at, when you look at a map here in Japan, what's right at this, what catches your eye when you look straight on? What countries? It's a quiet crowd. So if we draw a map in America, North America is right in the center of the map. If the Europeans draw a map, Europe's right in the center of the map, right? What happens if all the maps were drawn like this? What would be front and center? Right? Africa. Now, has the world changed? Do we all just fall off? Right? Who said north has to be up? Right? And if all the maps were like that, we might just think about the world a little differently. And that's the point. Sometimes we just have to take traditional reality and flip it a little, get ourselves to think about the world differently. And in the BOP context, I'm going to use that and say, when you think about the base of the pyramid, what are the words that generally come to mind when you think about the poor? You know? And again, I'm not going to solicit feedback, but a lot of people say, you know, they lack money, they lack education, we need to help them, they're isolated, they don't have much. And I think those are all great terms, but they often suggest what the base of the pyramid doesn't have. And it leads us to want to help them. And while that's very humanitarian, that's a bad business strategy. And actually, it's probably a bad humanitarian strategy, right? We want to help them, and then we're going to tell them what to do, right? Because if we're going to help them, we're the teacher, and we're the expert. And if we go in with being the teacher and the expert, we're missing a whole second half of the equation. How about if we view the BOP as colleagues, partners, and advisors? Right? So if you're running a business, and I know there's some examples, I'm guessing they did that, but that's what you have to look at. They are just as smart as we are. And if you're not working with them, one, you're not hearing the voices of your potential customers, which is a bad business strategy. And two, you're missing half of the intellectual capital out there to solve the problem. So, and I just put this picture up. This is when I worked in Indonesia. I was a general manager of a joint venture in Padang, West Sumatra, and we were doing cinnamon. And what this picture is of my leadership team. You're running a business. Are you comfortable with that? That's the leadership team, right? Zafro Zamzami is my procurement manager. A couple of the guys on the ground were heads of the local cooperatives, the Cooperasa Unit Desa. They were actually co-owners of the enterprise. So this was a big venture by McCormick Spice, so the biggest spice company in the world. And they were co-owners. But this is what a management team looks like, right? So you have to begin to think a little bit differently. And I think I'm going to let this one go. So this gets to sort of the first piece of this co-create, innovate, integrate. We have to craft solutions with the base of the pyramid. And just a couple of things to think about. One is we need to surface embedded assumptions, and then we need to figure out how do we actually want to interact with the base of the pyramid? What are the guidelines for doing that? So again, I just want to say that as you begin to think about it, there actually are some strategies for execution here that can help you be more successful. So if we go from innovate or co-create to pilot, I want to talk just briefly about this idea of orchestrate effective experiments, but we also have to think about building the markets around us. And I think this is interesting, and maybe, I know some companies in Japan have struggled a little bit, and people say, well, what's going on? Why is there much difficulty in Japan? And I'm going to hazard a guess, okay? I'm not going to say it's true or not, but I think it might be the case, at least for some companies. And I'm not talking about the companies that are going to present next. That's not the point at all. So please, that's not who I'm talking about. But I know there's been some investments to help organizations pilot. Piloting in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're not piloting towards achieving scale, it's not useful. Piloting is part of a journey. It has to be a journey towards scale. And if a pilot doesn't work, what does that mean? It just means you learned a whole heck of a lot about what not to do. That is not the end of the journey. If that were the end of the journey in technology R&D, we tried something, it didn't work in our first pilot, and we quit, we might still be in the Stone Age. Right? It's about learning. Pilots have to be towards something. And I sometimes think we forget that it's part of a longer-term strategy. So if pilots are not built into a broader strategy of achieving sustainability at scale, I do not think they're going to be successful. Right? And if enterprises aren't thinking about all of those things, sort of the co-create, the innovate, the integrate, the pilot in and of itself may not be as fruitful as we might hope. And then the last is this idea of integrate. And that's, how do we expand across this market? And I'm just going to give you an example to show you how it can be done. This is ITC in India, the India Tobacco Company. They now get into a lot of commodity farming. And what they did, without going into too many details, is they first said, you know what? There are some really inefficient intermediaries. In the sense, the intermediaries were taking a vast amount of the value. They were paying the farmers too little, and they were charging the companies too much. So what ITC did is they figured out, and it took them some time, and they built some real capability to understand how they could have a connection directly into soybean farmers and convince the farmers to sell to ITC. Right? And there's a lot to that I don't have time to go into, but they actually figured out how to do that, They built a capability of really understanding how to work with farmers, some trial and error. But that worked. It got profitable. They said, that's cool. Let's think about other crops. So they added coffee, they added wheat, and they said, this is great. We're now scaling. And then they said, well, if we can if we can buy from the farmers, why can't we sell to them too? So they used the platform to provide them better inputs. They sold them seeds, fertilizer, and guess what? That actually gave them better outputs too, so it was good for the business. And then they said, let's use that platform for some other things. So they added healthcare and a number of other activities. And they've they've had some disappointments, but in general, they've been very successful and have built a pretty substantial business serving base of the pyramid farmers in India. And if you're interested, take a look at ITC. It just gives you a sense. And they built what I call social embeddedness. They had the capability they built over time to go into BOP markets and really understand what was going on. They understood the context. They understood the players. They understood how to partner. Not that they came in knowing how to do it, but they had the capabilities to figure that out. And if everything is new every time you go somewhere, scaling is so very hard. But if you can build a skill or a capability, you can take that from market to market. And that's really about being able to integrate into the local communities. So hence it comes back to this idea of co-create, innovate, integrate. And then I want to just talk briefly about creating value with the poor. How am I doing on time? 10 more minutes? Okay, perfect. So, and this is, again, this is like Business 101. If we do not understand what value our product delivers for the customer, can we be successful in Japan? Would you run a business with have no real sense of what sort of value you're delivering for your customer and no way to check on that over time and improve it? Would that be good business? Why do we keep doing that at the base of the pyramid? Why are we not in regular conversations with our customers, our suppliers? And we created a framework to help companies do this. So this was published in a journal. You may know the Harvard Business Review, right? So if you know it, it's not a journal for folks interested in I shouldn't say this, being goody-goodies, right? It's for business managers, right? So this wasn't a tool just for people to demonstrate how great they're doing. This is really a tool for them to get better, to deliver more value, to create a better value proposition. I'm going to let this one go, too. And what we were really trying to do is figure out and help managers figure out who is impacted and how they're affected. And what we decided to use was to look at poverty and the changes in poverty. One, if you change someone's poverty, are you creating value for them? Presumably, if you alleviate their poverty, is that a value creation opportunity? I think it is. So we began to think about enhancing poverty as creating value. And of course, if you're a company, that's a way for you to speak to the development community too, because they don't really care how much money you make. They really care about how much poverty you alleviate. Right? So we're connecting value creation for both the company and the development community around poverty. And what we really want to do, and there's a term called monitoring and evaluation, and we said, you're not there to check how well you're doing. You're there to assess it and make it better. Right? That's what we do with value proposition. So it's not a check the box. It's how do we assess and enhance poverty. And we created this framework. And it's really around, without going into too much detail, poverty is more than economic well-being. Poverty is also about capabilities. It's about living the life you want to lead. And it's also about being connected, being respected, not being isolated. So, a question, I could ask you is, would you rather, which would be worse, to be poor, to be sick, or to be ignored? Right? There isn't a clear answer, right? Poverty is not this one-dimensional thing about income, and we sometimes forget that. So if you're creating value, you have to think about the value creation on multi-dimensions, and then if you're an enterprise, whatever the model, you're going to have the buyers, the sellers, and then the broader community. And so we call this, our 3x3. And if you can begin to understand this and enhance this, you've got a real opportunity to kind of build a viable value proposition and make it better over time. And it becomes a very dynamic process, right? I'm not going to go into all the details, but you can do it at a relatively, I'm not going to say high level, but you can do it by doing really well-conducted qualitative interviews, conversations that are structured right. Both the process and the content matters, but you can get that kind of information by spending time in the communities really integrating. And then you can do it sort of even more sophisticated, doing rich data collection to have a deeper dive. And either one is, there are multiple ways of doing this. And we do a lot of this work. We've done this in the field in Africa, Asia, Latin America with quite a number of different companies who are really interested in understanding their value proposition. And again, for the sake of time, I'm going to let this go. Because I want to come to the last part, which is this idea of integrated with development community investments. All right? And strangely enough, or maybe not so strange, there's an awful lot of money floating around the development community. Right? And a question that we're often challenged with, and this is not meant as any indictment of anyone, but there's a fairly strong argument to say that the development community has done well, but they could do better. Right? They've spent a lot, there's been some successes, but they wish they could do better. And there's increasing interest, represented by our colleagues here, of thinking about the role of business in poverty. And that's a very, very exciting kind of new thing. And what they are doing, hold on to your hats here, they're subsidizing business. Does that make you nervous? Subsidizing business. Some people go, oh, this is bad. One, development shouldn't subsidize business. And two, business shouldn't take subsidies because that would be a bad thing. So the answer to that response is, what are you, nuts? You wouldn't take free money? Right? So just thinking about subsidies, there's about $1 trillion of those floating around the globe. They're generally for activities that would otherwise not happen, address market failures. I just picked some from the U.S. We do it to encourage R&D. We provide access to credit, management assistance, product support, enable consumption. So SNAP for us, it used to be called food stamps. Something like $28 billion is spent serving 25 million people a month. So those of you who know SNAP, it's now sort of a swipe card, a debit card. But where do those people go in the U.S.? Does the U.S. have lots of sort of government warehouses where people go and swipe their card? No. They go to the retail shops. They go to the supermarkets. They go to Walmart. And do we care in the U.S. that the government is subsidizing Walmart through food stamps? Right? Because Walmart charges them just the same. It's basically a voucher system. And do you think Walmart's going, no, we don't want this subsidized money? Right? Subsidies are a big part of business everywhere. The question is, how do we use them right in the base of the pyramid, right? So, and the development side, for development people to say, we're happy to work with businesses if they don't make a profit. And then I say, you're crazy, right? We do it in the U.S., we do it in Japan. Why can't we do it in Kenya? Why don't we help businesses help the poor like we do in the U.S.? So what we're trying to do, and this is actually some ongoing work that we have, but we think it's really interesting, and there's a set of potential partners out there, and we're calling them scaling facilitators. And there's a challenge as an enterprise, and I suspect you guys saw this, right? There's just a lot of people out there. How do we figure out who we might want to partner with? How do we organize that landscape and make it strategic? So what we've done is we've sort of this is the landscape. And I think I'll just skip over that. What we did is we created a system that said, look, you need to think about two things. You need to think about support that goes directly to your venture, right? And that could be, impact investing. It's access to low cost sources of capital. You also have to think about market creation, right? So I was chatting with someone over dinner last night. I can't remember who asked the question. Maybe it wasn't dinner. But we were talking about clean water. And I think all of you recognize the benefits of drinking clean water. But in a low-income community, they've been using a water source forever and ever and ever. And the water looks clean, right? It's still clean. How do you get them to switch to something that looks exactly the same, but happens to cost them a lot more? What do you have to do? You got to invest money to get them to change their behavior. So if I say this is a great place, I'm going to invest, all of my startup capital, my, $12 million to do behavior change. Erica's running the same business. She's going to wait till I'm done, and she's going to come in right behind me. Right? No business wants to pay for public goods. And that becomes an interesting role for the development community, because we need to think about creating the markets around the enterprises too. And as an enterprise leader, you need to do that too. You need to think about, how do I build my venture? How do I build the markets around them? And then, I think about it that there are investments that are really operational in nature, and then there are investments that build the institutions. And then you begin to think about, okay, what's my partnership strategy? Right? And there's a set of things that help us run on the ground better. There's a set of organizations out there that actually know how to run businesses, how to market intelligence on the markets you're interested in. It's not like there's a blank space and no one knows anything about it. There's actually a set of organizations that, if you can demonstrate some success, are willing to provide a variety of different resources. And there's actually a number of market creation activities going on now. More and more people thinking about both facilitating demand and facilitating supply. And then at the broader level, there's increasing interest in changing public policy. And that's something you may need to think about as an enterprise, depending on what you're in. Do you need to have some changes in legislation? And you need, as an enterprise, to do this. Regular companies. Companies in the developed world think about their partnerships. Companies serving the base of the pyramid do too. And the one thing I encourage, because it's neglected so often, is I think companies in the base of the pyramid either need to have an individual do this on their own or be part of their tasks, but they need to be at the top level, and I call it a chief ecosystem director. They need to be focused on the market opportunities around the company and build these partnership networks. And those networks have to evolve over time. You add new partners, some have to go away. That's an entire ecosystem that needs to be managed. So is Schwan here? I borrowed this slide from Schwan. There he is all the way in the back. So thanks again for letting me have it. I love this slide. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Right? And I think it applies in this case. Right? We need to think a lot more about how do we partner more successfully. So, again, there are guiding principles. We do understand more about value proposition, and there are ways to strategically think about partnerships. You just got to do this, right? It isn't this blank space where you can just go start and pretend there's nothing that's been learned. But we have more to learn. I'm going to skip that one. And I'm going to stop here and just say that, that's part of our journey that we're on, is to keep extending this thinking and saying, okay, we've got the initial frameworks, but you probably have a whole set of questions about, how do we go deeper in this? How does this apply to a particular industry? And that's where we need to go to get even richer and better understandings of how to execute. And that's the direction we're heading. We've developed something called a BOP roadmap that we're launching in about 2 weeks that's really trying to convene sort of the global community to begin to think about, how do we create more knowledge from what we've learned? Because a lot of our learnings are disappearing. And if we don't learn, we're not going to get any better as a global community either. We're not going to get better, and we have to. Because I do think BOP business is a future. I guess I would say a future without BOP business or inclusive business, or whatever term you want to use, it's starting to look like a pretty bleak future. Right? Business has to play a bigger role in addressing social issues. And they have to do it in a way that makes sense for business. So I'll stop there. I don't know if I'm supposed to take Q&A now or later. Do I take my questions now, or do we hold them later? Okay, well, then I'll say thank you.
ロンドン教授ありがとうございました。それではここで、ロンドン教授のプレゼンテーションを受けまして、パネルディスカッションに移りたいと思います。ただいまご講演をいただいておりました、ロンドン教授、国際協力銀行、東南アジア 太平洋州部、東南アジア第5課の課長、若林仁様、そして国際金融公社インクルーシブビジネスグループ、グローバルプログラムマネージャーの石川エリ子様にご登壇をお願いいたします。Okay, so now I would like to switch to English. And first, after Ted's presentation, I would like to have a few comments from Mr. Wakabayashi, and starting with Mr. Wakabayashi. Please, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess I'll go with English. First of all, thank you very much for the Sasagawa Foundation for inviting to this panel. And I'd just like to briefly introduce what JICA is doing in support of BOP or inclusive business, particularly initiated by Japanese companies in Japan. This is a general concept, and well, JICA, as you may know, is the bilateral development agency under the Japanese government. And when we started our discussions in participating in supporting BOP business activities, of course we had to define what would be our role in supporting these activities or ventures. And looking back, I think we can explain in three segments, which is indicated in the over here. One is on financing role. There has been talk about the missing middle issue. When the BOP business companies or enterprise start up, traditional financing will not be available, and there could be additional support from the public side in the financing domain. The second one is technical assistance, and there was a mention in Ted's slide as well, but traditionally as an ODA agency, we have been conducting technical assistance in various forms. I'll touch upon that later. And I think more increasingly, we feel it is important to participate in creating a platform for engaging the various partners which will enable the BOP business to become more successful and to play as a part from the public side. So what we do is basically three things. JICA solicits proposals from Japanese corporations who intends to venture into the BOP business, and we basically extend our grants for the preparation of their business models. The second would be we have a facility to extend financing. Although this is not yet, started up, but we are in consideration of participating in the financing side. I think more importantly, traditionally we do have a TA facility, and what we are trying to, let's say, create in this in the BOP business activity is to have a more synergetic effect with the TA system, TA support, by way of supporting, let's say, the surrounding environment to make, let's say, the business environment more approachable for the companies or maybe the local participants to create the business on the ground. And that will enhance, well, since we're starting from Japanese companies' ideas, but maybe to create local joint ventures together with the local partners. And that will enable to create developmental outcomes, maybe in the customer side or by creating employees. I'm just going to just skim through this, but this is just a slide trying to scope where JICA should be or would be able to participate in the financing support. So, of course, we are not the private financing institution, but so we may be able to provide grants, but we can also extend financing, either debt or equity. So we had done some study on where should be our scope of financing, if that is going to happen. So basically, we may extend possibly a certain subsidy type grant. I don't know if that's going to be allowed or not, but as an idea. But I think the important thing is in the incubation or the startup phase. That's going to be a large chunk of our participation that should be justified. But of course, on the growth side as well. So we are still currently considering how we may be able to engage in the financing. I'm just giving a few slides for our activities in supporting the companies. This one is a company called Organic Solutions Japan, which had already had a strong connection in East African countries, starting from Kenya, and the initiating party has extended their activities in Rwanda. They have already started their businesses, but this has been this is a very small company and trying to engage the local community, but also trying to create new products, the toilet sanitizer or the fertilizer for the farmers, to make new businesses on the ground. So it's really a local-based business incubation type model that we have supported. Another example is the case of Ajinomoto in Ghana. And as you may know, Ajinomoto is a large-scale company. They have a global strategy, but they had established their strategy to participate in social business, and they selected Ghana as their prime country. So they are utilizing their expertise in the nutrient goods, but they are trying to tackle the issue of the nutrient, the Ghana's children during the weaning period. And what they have done is, by trial and errors, they have created a whole set of partnerships surrounding their new business models. And this, as I understand it, did not happen, let's say, by their plan. So things started to grow, and JICA had also the privilege to support together, but they had grown this whole group of partnerships surrounding their business model. But still they are ongoing, and they are now moving to scale up their businesses. But this is one example for JICA support in the large-scale corporations, which could benefit the BOP on the ground. This is an example on the financing side, and just going to quickly introduce that we have a private sector investment finance, not the traditional government-to-government ODA, but this is a financing support which can be extended to the private project or company. And in this case, we did an equity participation together with IFC to Pakistan's microfinance bank. But of course, this is only one example. Okay, so that's my introduction, and I have maybe I'll say some comments on Ted's presentation later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wakabayashi. Sorry that the time is rather limited, so now I would like to ask Ishikawa-san to talk about a bit on IFC's activities first.
So I think we're going to show the video, correct? As Ted suggested earlier, it's very important to have the BOP here with us. And so I actually went ahead and executive produced a video. So just take a look. Thank you.
IFC が支援するインクルーシブビジネスは300企業を超え80カ国2億5000万人以上の人々に影響を与えています。例えばケニアの木の手さん、彼は農業では食べられないと諦めかけていました。そんな彼にトレーニングや市場へのアクセスを提供する会社、それがエコム SMS です。
妻と子供たち、あと母と子で暮らしています。生活も良くしたいし、子供たちには満足のいい教育を受けさせたい。前はコーヒー豆や他のものを売って稼ごうと頑張っていましたが、うまくいきませんでした。ほんの少ししか生産できなかったんで、家族を食べさせるだけでもいつも大変でした。だから農業をやめようとも考えました。
エコム SMS はケニアで20万の農家からコーヒー豆を調達し、品質と生産量の向上、市場開発に取り組んでいます。
地元の農協を通じて去年 SMS に参加し、トレーニングを受け始めました。何か学びたかったんです。
自分も農業をしていたものですから、コーヒー農家の苦労や気持ちはよくわかりますし、信頼関係もうまく築けます。SMS は意欲的な農協と組んで、農家の人たちを50人程度のグループに分け、それぞれにトレーニングを提供します。多くの人たちと一緒に働き、彼らの生活の向上に貢献できるこの仕事はとてもやりがいがあります。
友人や近所の人たちも一緒にトレーニングを受けていて、誰が一番コーヒー豆の生産量を増やせるか、いつも競い合っているんですよね。いい刺激になっています。自分が育てたコーヒーも前は実に黒い斑点がありました。今はきれいな赤色をしています。トレーニングで良くなったという手応えもあります。コーヒー豆も重くなった。
Visiting them, you see many farmers. 農家の人たちを訪ねると、家や服が新しくなっていたり、何よりも将来の希望を持った彼らの笑顔が輝いています。Because there is hope now.
今のうちには部屋が一つしかありません。かなり窮屈なんで、家族のために新しく広い家を建てているところです。農場を大きくする夢もあります。コーヒー豆をもっと育てて、もっと稼いで子供を学校に行かせるんです。
I am Eriko Ishikawa from the International Finance Corporation, and I actually executive produced this video. And I'm glad to be able to bring a little bit of what the BOP actually is on the ground. As you may know, the International Finance Corporation is part of the World Bank Group.